Hey everybody, it is Mike Schumann of the Daily Hoosier here for another episode of East 17th Street, trying something a little bit new live from Simon Scott Assembly Hall at the conclusion of the Darian DeVries press conference, joined by Seth Tao. Seth, we just heard from the new head coach, along with IU President Pam Witten, Scott Dolson. What's your reactions from the day, hearing from everybody, and kind of wrapping up what's been I don't even know, 5 month or not 5 month, 5 week process here that concludes with the head coach of West Virginia, Darren DeVries, coming to IU.
Sometimes it feels like 5 months, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that was kind of a Freudian slip there.
Yeah. I mean, look, I've been here for multiple of these sorts of introductions, and I've seen how has done some of these in the past. And I gotta say, a lot of it felt maybe more muted than it had in the past. Like there wasn't all the fanfare. They didn't have a giant stage set up on the court. They didn't
Yeah,
kind of do a whole dog and pony show to roll everything out. It was just kind of, they brought everybody in, and it was kind of similar when they brought Kurt Signetti in too. So maybe that's just Scott Dolson style, but they, just kind of got right down to business and seemed to, and Pam Witten spoke and Scott Dolson spoke and Darren DeVries spoke, and it just kind of got right into it and just laid out, this is what we were looking for. This is why he was our fit. This is, he laid out why this was a fit for him, and his kind of vision and everything. And I mean, it maybe talking the talk doesn't stick out as much as it did with Signetti, because just hearing somebody talk like that for IU football was just kind of jarring and stuck out. And you don't necessarily get that sense with IU basketball because of IU basketball being what it is. But I mean, it's not like they projected anything less than confidence. When he goes out and ends his prepared statement with "banners will rise again." I mean, he certainly made his point.
Yeah, I thought that was a great point you mentioned right from the jump there, because I had the same reaction. When this press conference got announced yesterday, I was thinking, okay, they're gonna, have it in public on the court of Assembly Hall with all kinds of pomps and circumstance. I mean, do you think that was a Dolson thing, or maybe just a DeVries saying, you know what, let's just get down to business. We don't need a big dog and pony show here.
I'd probably lean the former, because of, like I said, I mean, that's kind of the same way they did it with Kurt Signetti. When they brought him in, in fall of 2023, they didn't. When IU introduced Tom Allen, and granted that was a different circumstance because they kind of did a combination press conference of addressing why they let Kevin Wilson go, and why they were immediately bringing in Tom Allen. But that was, felt like more of a formal thing. They went up into the Hankey Hall of Champions to do that, and it felt more of a formal thing, when that happened. And not that it was informal with Signetti, but I mean, they just brought everybody down to the team room, and there wasn't some whole big grand stage that they had him go up on. But I mean, especially with basketball, I mean, you remember, and you got to keep in mind that it was Fred Glass at the helm of IU athletics at that point. But I mean, I think back to when they hired Archie Miller, and when they introduced him, and they had a whole big setup here on the court, and did a whole big, had fans in the stands. It felt like, for that day. And if it wasn't fans, then he had a whole lot of people with him, and then the program just had a whole lot of alums or something like that. But I mean, it felt like a whole big thing when they rolled out Archie Miller, and this. So it seems like it's more of a Dolson thing than, I mean, not. Look, I'm sure Dolson is also looking for people who may be aligned with that get down to business sort of mentality, but it seems like I would say it's probably more of a Dolson thing.
Yeah, Seth, you might be cutting out there, but yeah, I talked to several people over the last 24 hours about DeVries, and one of the things that stood out to me, people were saying, like, he's not a huge personality. He's more of a grinder. He's more of a guy that's focused on process and things like that. And so, I could also see it being the case that he was a guy that didn't want big fanfare. I wouldn't come out and say that he was nervous today, but you could see some nerves in front of the microphone a little bit, which I think just about anybody, save for like your true iconic personalities who love the big stage are going to have a little bit of nerves in that moment. So I think kind of a muted process probably made sense for a number of reasons. I think a lot of people are just kind of ready to get this process going. Um, it was the first time we got a chance to talk to Scott Dolson since everything started. Was there any reaction that you have to kind of the things he said about the process that he went through, the characteristics that he was looking for, or anything along those lines?
I mean, look, we expected him that he was. We expected that he wasn't really going to get too in the weeds with the process, the actual process and the timeline and everything. And I think he held up to that. Like, I don't think we got a super illuminating answer as far as the timeline. And obviously, it came together pretty quickly because they talked about how they were being as respectful as they could be about letting DeVries focus his attention on West Virginia while their season was still going on.
Right.
And certainly, separate conversation, but certainly a lot of people thought that they would still be playing right now. So it clearly kind of happened quickly, but the conversations had been going on, before that point. But I mean, beyond that, I mean, we didn't, it's not like we got a super illuminating it, and it's not like we were also able to question Dolson about things with the process. But nothing. There wasn't a ton I'd say that surprised me about what Dolson said. I mean, and Pam Whitten kind of talked about it too. Just the fact that they wanted somebody who was in tune with modern basketball, that they wanted somebody, wanted some in tune with modern basketball, not, was kind of, played with a style, and not that they were necessarily looking for a specific, you know, specific style of anything.
Right.
Yes, they came together and kind of found some stats and analytics about, what makes a winning basketball program in the modern era, but they wanted somebody who was in tune with the modern game and where it would be going. So, that again doesn't necessarily surprise me because that is clearly something this program has needed. And just clearly somebody that knows how to win, somebody that is a winner and knows how to win. I mean, Dolson mentioned, his winning percentage in close games, right, and how that was so important to them. And, hearing that number is definitely stuck out to me. But I mean, again, it's nothing surprising. And then just kind of getting somebody that kind of aligns with the overall vision and archetype of what they look for in a leader of a program. And I mean, I said to you right after the press conference, it struck me how similar he sounded to, when DeVries talked, how similar he sounded to Kurt Signetti and in some ways Terry Morin, just in the ways that they, he kept mentioning how process oriented he is. And, he would just say, it's about the work. You got to put the work in, the work begins now, all those sorts of things. And it's just clearly there's this sort of archetype of a coach that Scott Dolson sees is the path forward.
Yeah. And it kind of struck me because Dolson said that he specifically remembered two moments where he had not an interaction with DeVries, but he remembered him, and I was at these same moments, so I remembered them as well. The 2023 NCAA tournament, Drake played Miami right before Indiana played Kent State, so it was, you were sitting there watching that game, and I remember seeing Scott and Stephen Harper, his deputy AD, in the tunnel before that game, and I joked with them in the tunnel because it was right when Fairleigh Dickinson had beat Purdue, and I made some joke to them about that, but I remember them watching that game, so he's being truthful when he says he was watching it, and I remember watching that game. And I remember watching West Virginia multiple times in the Bahamas, competing with teams that Indiana couldn't compete with. And watching Drake, watching West Virginia, the thing that stood out was like, man, those guys play hard. Like they really stood out to me in that regard. And, it sounds like that stuck with Scott too. Um, I wanted to go back to just Pam Whitten, just to not completely gloss over that, because it's an interesting time. Hiring a head coach from another high major program is an expensive venture for a university. I think the reports have been that the total cost to buy out DeVries from West Virginia is going to be in like the 5 to 6 million range. Not to mention his new contract. Not to mention everything, all the investment that's been made in the football program here in the last year. So, this is an interesting time for a university. I know the Big Ten has some pretty good TV contracts and things of that nature, but from a president standpoint, from a board of trustees standpoint, that this has been quite a statement about where athletics fits into the landscape of a university here over the last year and a half for IU.
Yeah, and I'm sure you could talk to some academics that might
Yeah,
not approve of that,
absolutely.
approve of that place within the university. But you're right; it is an interesting. Uh, it is a statement. I guess you put it well. It is a statement about how important this is, and I mean, she went up there and mentioned that it's all about that DeVries talked about it's all about the student athletes and emphasize the student athletes. And she kind of took it a step further that it's not just the student athletes, it's the students in the student section and the student athletes, and that it's all about kind of, providing a good experience, student experience. And obviously there's a little more to it than that. And, that especially men's basketball here and football here, they're kind of big money makers for the university in a lot of ways. So that's, yeah, it is important. And she clearly hit the green, gave the green light on a lot of things here.
It is interesting too what you said about Signetti, because I had the same reaction listening to him. Several comments DeVries made at Signetti popped in my head talking about process, not talking about not making bold statements about championships or anything like that. I almost feel like it's a weird time at IU because you don't typically think about like the football program being like the gateway for IU athletics and kind of setting the standard, but it almost does feel like DeVries, has to live up to what Signetti has done. You mentioned Terry Morin. And I think you're absolutely right. I think those two in particular have set kind of a template in Scott's mind, whether it's spoken or written or just kind of something that he's absorbed over time. It certainly seems like this coach, Darian DeVries, kind of falls in that same mold of a very process oriented type of coach that's going to you know it- I you can't sit here and make any bold predictions, but the thing that stood out to me when I really researched DeVries was his his run at Drake. There was 47 years, I think I added up, that preceded him with one 20-win season, and he immediately won 20 games 6 years in a row. I mean that's a complete flip of a switch. And if people noticed in the press release that Indiana put out, that was kind of talked about. You could unveil a little bit of the process when they in that release, because they compared what he did to like Nate Oates and some of the other top mid-major coaches, kind of the flip in winning percentage, the number of wins year over year from before that coach arrived to after. And I think the interesting thing, and I would, if we get a chance to talk to Scott, one of the questions I would have is like how he viewed the West Virginia season, because it doesn't stand out on a one win loss basis. 19-13, pretty much the same as IU. But I think there's some details there. But I really think it was the Drake years, the 6 years, averaging 25 wins per year in his first time as a head coach. There's some Signetti vibes in that part of his run as well.
Yeah, and I mean the caveat to add with West Virginia this year is that I mean DeVries' son Tucker, a really good player, was probably going to be one of West Virginia's best players. Was out for the year in December, and so that probably threw a lot of wrenches into their plans for the year. And he still put them in position to where they were very expected to make the tournament, and it was a big shock that they didn't. So that's kind of the caveat there. Um, I've heard people, I think the people that are maybe doubting the hire, it feels like one of the main comments I've seen is people are kind of compare this to the Archie Miller hire and just
Right.
hiring a guy that was mostly successful at a mid-major and has yes, DeVries did a solid job this year at West Virginia, but you know still doesn't have a ton of power conference experience, and the similarities certain maybe in some playing style, like I wrote about this morning. Just he clearly favors a slower pace, and maybe more defensive oriented over the last few years. So maybe so I've seen people that are kind of wondering, is this just an Archie Miller redo? And I think the way to I don't. I think this is a much different vibe than that, because I think you look at Archie. That the big difference to me is, kind of like you said, Drake had not very did not have much history or success behind it when DeVries took over there, and he built up that program. Archie Miller did do very well at Dayton, but Dayton was a program that had maybe not as consistently successful to where he took them to 4 straight tournaments before he came over to IU. But Drake, Dayton did have some success here and there, and were not like a complete afterthought of a program the way Drake was, until DeVries got there. So it's kind of night and day in that respect. Like DeVries built up that Drake program. Archie just kind of went in, and he did it, not to not to discredit what Archie Miller did at Dayton necessarily, but it's just kind of night and day to kind of go into a program and do well, somewhere that's had success before, and versus a place that, like you said, one tournament appearance in 40 something years. Like that's just night and day. And I think it takes a lot of stones to go into a program like Drake and build it up the way. It takes a lot of stones. It takes a lot of self-belief, and that's really what you need at a job like this. The self-belief that you can't kind of let when you get into like the fishbowl aspect of the job, you can't let the doubters and you can't let the naysayers and all the voices that are going to be around the program, you can't let that impact your vision and your direction for the program. And that's kind of what you need when you go into a program like Drake and try to build it up.
Yeah, that's a great connection there that I hadn't really thought of. That if you're going to take your first D1 job, you'd prefer it not be at a place like Drake was when DeVries took it over. Like, no history of winning. You got to have a lot of belief in yourself to think you're going to be that guy that does it. And it does segue into him taking this job. That's what I asked him today is, why leave one high major for a job that everybody calls a fishbowl job, where you're going to be under so much more scrutiny, and especially in an era with transfer portal and NIL, where you can kind of do a lot of the things that you need to do at a West Virginia, or he was rumored to be a candidate at Iowa. You can do a lot at those jobs now where you couldn't in the past. And I don't think there's as many barriers to success at other mid majors, like you see like a Texas Tech or a Todd Golden go to Florida and immediately have success. I mean, I think you can do this in a lot of different ways, but it says something about him that he wanted to come to Indiana because he knew of the history, because he knew of the everything that comes with being the IU head coach. And I don't think that there's like a prototype for that. Like, he doesn't seem like the most dynamic personality, but he's also not afraid of it. So I think there's more than one way to be a fit in that regard.
Yeah, it's more of a quiet confidence with DeVries. I would not, at least based on today, I would not peg him as the type to be going out on the football field and saying Purdue sucks, Ohio State sucks. But it's certainly a more quiet confidence. But again, we talked about it, when they brought in Signetti, that, part of what Signetti was doing, it was very intentional what Signetti was doing with all that, and that he was trying to, rally and the fan base and get the fan base excited and make the fan base start to believe that, maybe this guy can really talk the talk, like, differently than we've heard people talk about Indiana football before. And that's what that program needed. You don't really need that with Indiana basketball. People are already excited about Indiana basketball naturally. People are already gonna, be dreaming about, a 6th banner, 7th banner, whatever you want, however many more banners going up in Assembly Hall. People already kind of picture that as being possible one day, and talk about the program like that. DeVries doesn't have to go out there and say and be as bold and brash and just really putting himself out there. He doesn't have to do that the way Signetti does.
Yeah, and the one person that was really present today, both before and after the press conference, was his son, Tucker DeVries. If people don't know, he was a multi-time Missouri Valley Player of the Year, was averaging 15 a game at West Virginia, shooting 47% from three before suffering a shoulder injury that ended his season. He's expected to get a hardship waiver and earn a fifth season of eligibility, and by all accounts, expected to play for Indiana next season. DeVries talked a lot about roster building, roster construction, that kind of stuff. One thing he said that really stood out to me in that regard is that you gotta identify players that fit. You can't just kind of slap together a team. I'm paraphrasing, but you got to build a team. You can't just have a bunch of incongruent parts. Is maybe another way to approximate what he said there. But kind of your reaction to that part of it. The job ahead that he has here in the next month, which as we saw with Signetti, this is going to be a massive time that's going to really go a long way towards the direction of next season, is what he's able to accomplish. Both with any players that are currently on the team, freshmen that he might want to bring with him, because by the way, he had a top 25 recruiting class at West Virginia, and the transfer portal opens next Monday, which is a significant point because getting this done before the portal is open puts Indiana in a spot where they can hit the ground running.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is just the challenges of modern college athletics that you have to deal with the transfer portal, and you kind of are going to have to re-recruit your own guys in season and from year to year, and that's just comes with the territory at this point. So it stuck out to me in that, I mean, he talks about it and in the way that you need to, and certainly, I mean, when you talk about what he said about kind of building a team and not just a collection of talent and a collection of players. And I mean, obviously, nobody was really putting down Mike Woodson today, or really, I mean, certainly DeVries was not even, direct,
Right.
referencing Mike Woodson at all. But like, those are obvious things that, came up the past couple of years with Mike Woodson and the way he built rosters. And just, there were a lot of times that it felt like it was just a collection of talent and a collection of players more so than, getting guys that fit together. It felt like he was just kind of going out and getting dudes and we'll figure it out later. And, that's the challenge of modern college athletics, is you need to acquire a lot of talent. And, it's kind of a Wild West type of race to get all those pieces together and to find the right ones that make them fit, and not bring in the bad ones that are the bad fits and the locker room cancers and the guys who are gonna get in the way of your team accomplishing what you want to do. And you're right that getting DeVries in here before the portal opens will help Indiana. It'll give him some time to meet with the current players, the current IU players, and figure out, okay, because some of the IU players have already gone to the portal, like Malik Renew, Gabe Cupps, and maybe there's names that I've missed that have gone in since since last I saw. But I mean, he can meet with guys like that, and guys like Luke Goody. I mean, and he could even meet with, Anthony Leal was at the press conference today, in the back of the room. And, he can meet with guys like Anthony Leal, Trey Galloway, and kind of get their opinions, and, both on the program as a whole and on specific guys, and just kind of figure out, okay, who from this current group do I want to be a part of next year's team? Who do I think? And he addressed it as well. DeVries did that, those players that are still here didn't come to IU because of him, DeVries. He didn't, those guys didn't come here to play for him. That doesn't mean that they, won't be able to stay around if both sides kind of see it as a good fit. And he won't have hard feelings if they don't see it as a good fit, because like he said, they came in here to play for Mike Woodson, and, now Mike Woodson's not here. So they kind of got to figure something out. And, he will not be on the same wavelength as everyone around here. But coming in now, week before the portal opens, whatever it is, he'll be able to meet with those guys, figure out, okay, who do I want to stay around, who do I think is not the right fit, which of these guys thinks that they're not the right fit for me, and you kind of go from there, and then you figure out what holes you got to fill.
Yeah, and you mentioned Leo being at the press conference. I did look back behind me several times. I was interested in if any of the current players were there. I saw him. I saw a couple walk-ons. That's the only people I saw there. So I have no idea if that means anything, but you do look for that kind of stuff. I remember in Archie's press conference, I think some of the key guys that didn't end up joining him, like Thomas Bryant, Ananobi, and James Blackman, I think they were there, but didn't follow. So it doesn't necessarily mean anything one way or the other, but just something that you look for.
To be fair, it's also spring break for IU right now. Yes. So, and obviously the athletes would have been expecting to or hoping to be playing in the NCAA tournament this week, but I mean, they don't have any classes to be here for. That some of them may have gone on vacation or may have gone to see their families or whatever. So, some of those current guys may not even be in town.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I hadn't thought about that. Obviously, it's pretty easy for Anthony Leo to be here today.
Right.
Anything else that stands out? You got a little bit of talk about scheduling. I know you did a deep dive on kind of the analytic profile of DeVries. What else kind of stands out that you want to touch on here before we wrap up?
You could get into the scheduling a little bit, but I mean, even DeVries was asked about it and didn't really go that deep, aside from saying, Kentucky and Marquette are on the schedule, and right. You kind of gotta, it felt like he didn't show much of his cards as far as scheduling, when he answered that question, and that's obviously, another challenge that this seems to evolve every year with what the selection committee looks for, or but that's obviously a separate conversation. Look, I think this is a guy who, time will tell, to a certain extent. We won't really know until the team takes the court next November, how this is really going to play out. And even then, it could still take some time. And, there's going to be a lot of new faces around here. But this is a guy who at least projects the confidence that you want to see in a guy taking over a program. He, understands the history and tradition that he's walking into, and is clearly on board with continuing to honor the past without, without going too far and living in the past. That was what I asked him about. And, he acknowledged that, everybody who built up this program deserves to be around and deserves to be a part of this because they helped build this thing up. And, they don't want to shy away from that, don't want to run away from that. And Dustin DePirac on Twitter made a good point also about that, it's going to be different. It could be different with DeVries as far as all of that, kind of how IU's had so much trouble towing the line the last few years, but, the last 25 years between, honoring the past and living in the past. And Dustin made a good point that, now IU is finally hired. They tried to the path of bringing in a Bob Knight guy. They tried that. It didn't work out. And also that Bob Knight passed away while that guy was leading the team. And so, you don't have necessarily that same shadow hanging over the program that, figuratively or literally, you don't have that same shadow hanging over the program that you had for the last 25 years. And so, some things are never going to change as far as the fan expectations and as far as the weight of the banners that are looking down on Assembly Hall every time the team takes the court. But maybe things will kind of simmer down a little bit. Maybe who really knows? But clearly, there's still going to be that kind of fine line between honoring the past and living in the past. And DeVries at least is for the people that are worried about IU just completely ditching its history. I mean, clearly that's not going anywhere.
Yeah, and I felt like he struck a good balance in his answer there. I think a lot of people would be disappointed if he just came out, scorched earth, said, we're done with the past. I don't think that's anything that anyone around here has an appetite for. I think the balance is maybe like, personnel wise and things like that, people that have been around here for a long time. He obviously needs to have full license to come in and from managers to medical staff to assistant coaches, obviously, all up and down the board. He needs to have full license to have whoever in place he wants. And as a guy who's been a head coach for 7 years, probably has a pretty good sense of what that should look like. So, I think even programs like North Carolina, Duke, Kansas, they don't completely sever themselves from their histories. They have the banners. Kansas has a great memorial to not just their history but college basketball right there in Fog Allen Fieldhouse. So I think there's a good balance, but I think I do think it's time. As you said, having done the former player as a coach to maybe put a little bit more distance between the past and the future. I know there's some that will say, well, the last coach was the wrong former player, but I think we've kind of reached the end of that line of thinking, if you will. Um, I guess moving forward, I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying. We're now in a point where we're not going to know how this thing's going to go for you say November, I say maybe 2 years from now in November. I mean, we'll have a good sense, but I think it is correct to say in the portal and NIL era, the timeline for putting your signature on a program is short, and expectations because of what you can do quickly with a roster should be high. But to truly say we know because his experience is limited to primarily mid-major, I think it might be a while before we truly know how this thing goes. I think the one thing to watch here over the next month that will be telling is what kind of players they get to come to the program. I think that was telling in the latter years of the Woodson era, the kind of players they weren't able to get, like wings that were, shooters, these coaches have reputations in the basketball world. People will think, okay, you want to go play for Darian DeVries for X, Y, and Z. And we're going to see that over the next month. What kind of things, what kind of players are they getting, and what kind of playing style does that uh, lead to? I think that's the one thing to look for here over the next month. It's obviously going to be a very busy time at the Daily Hoosier as we, keep track of every current player, every incoming player, high school recruits. I think I need to touch base with Trent Sisley and Haroon Zerno, but I'd be stunned if Sisley's not going to keep his commitment. I think he's just an IU kid through and through. I think that's what that commitment was from the jump. But I mentioned the West Virginia kids that were committed. A couple of those guys were California kids that I don't know that they had any real connection to Morgantown, and one of them, ironically, was a son of the Pac-12's all-time leading scorer and a guy that played against IU in the 1992 Final Four, I believe, or Elite Eight maybe for UCLA. McLean is his name. So lots to play out. We'll obviously be covering all that for you. As I look in the corner of my eye, I see Tucker DeVries coming back out onto the court. So I guess that'd be a good time as any to wrap it up here. Seth, any closing thoughts?
No, I think we got it all out there.
All right. Well, he is Seth Tao. I'm Mike Schumann for this episode of East 17th Street. We will catch you all later.